Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Schuett, and I'm the Communications Director at Electric Mobility Canada. Thanks for joining us for a pre-election one-on-one discussion between Brian Masse, NDP candidate for Windsor West, and Daniel Breton, CEO of Electric Mobility Canada. During this webinar, we'll learn where the NDP stands on electric mobility across the country. Please note your questions in the chat, and we'll answer them after the discussion. This webinar is being recorded and will be available online as soon as we have heard from the candidates of other parties. And now I'd like to introduce Mr. Brian Masse and Daniel Breton.
Hi, Mr. Masse. Hi, Brian. How are you?
Hi, good. Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for Electric Mobility Canada doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. So the way we're doing this, we sent you a series of recommendations, and we sent you our questions in advance, so you know exactly, what questions I will ask to all the parties. So before we start, do you have any comments you would like to say regarding where you see the future of electric mobility, or anything that's relevant regarding your part?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and this is some pleasure to be here again to do this. This is my 22nd year as a member of Parliament, and electric vehicle manufacturing and integration into our market has been something that's been part of my entire career. I was the MP who actually held public showings of the movie Who Killed the Electric Car and challenged General Motors with regards to that, and worked with then Member of Parliament Joe Camartin, Dr. David Suzuki, and Jack Layton to create the first green car strategy for Canada. And since I've been a strong advocate for electrical vehicles, which doesn't get the attention it probably should in Ottawa. It's often difficult to get them to talk about cars in general and also devices. And there's more electrical devices now that have entered the market than ever before, which is exciting because outside the mobility aspect, there is always what I said is the ancillary elements that we see now with gardening and other types of tools around your workbench that are providing better and safer options for the users. And I'll just conclude by saying, I was the one who, pushing hard for an EV incentive for years and was aghast when the Windsor Stellantis minivan was left off the incentive. The incentive was paltry to begin with compared to other nations, and I'll get into that later as we talk, but I was really proud to get that Windsor-made vehicle. And sadly, though, right now, those incentives have actually been abandoned by the government, and those Stellantis workers are basically at home today because there's been a 2-week layoff starting today because of what's taking place. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and hoping that we can continue to provide good, innovative solutions. And also, some of the Electrical Mobility Canada's recommendations and work are things that are really falling within the wheelhouse of where we need to go for priorities of climate change, being competitive, and also having innovation that branches out beyond in many other respects. So thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So let's start with the first question. So what is your party's proposal to support the purchase of electric car, light truck, or motorbike?
Yeah, so there's a new position that we've always been, I guess not new position, but new in terms of what we want the country to go to, is a position of having a $10,000 EV rebate for vehicles and for purchase and also for lease. And also additionally, we want some used components rebates as well too for used vehicles, because that's another issue that is now going to emerge as we've seen electric vehicles stronger in the market. And there's no better time to do that with the U.S. Changing direction right now. But it's incredible, as I've said in my opening remarks, when you think about this, the Stellantis minivan right now that has an EV battery in it, and it's one of the ones that's domestically manufactured, has no incentive right now. And there's not one from the province of Ontario. And you think about how strange that is when you can still get an incentive for a Windsor-made minivan in the United States, and have several states, including Texas, Alabama, a whole series of states that still give support for that minivan, where we have workers laid off right now, and our own country doesn't. And we also have the provinces do it.
Even under Donald Trump, there's still
even under Donald Trump. Yes, thank you. Exactly. And this is absurd, and it's insulting at best. And so what we've called for is waiving the GST off of domestically manufactured vehicles right now to deal with the tariffs that are taking place. Add those EV incentives, and imagine if the province of Ontario finally did something. Like we have the NDP governments in Manitoba and British Columbia that have $4,000 incentives for the Windsor-made minivan, but we don't have that from our own province of Ontario. So if the federal government came in and provided an EV incentive, the province did, and we waived the GST, we would looking towards $20,000 to $30,000 off of greening of our fleets. And so we also believe in domestic procurement with that, with regards to Build Canada, Buy Canada. So those are great opportunities for municipal, provincial, and federal governments to get into electric vehicles, and with incentives to do so with Buy Canada. So those are a couple of things that we've been talking about. In the time, I first had to ask for an emergency debate in the House of Commons on November 26th. November 26th. So when the federal government's EV program ran out and they chose not to renew it, was absolutely horrendous. And on top of that, I have asked for the Competition Bureau, and there is an investigation going on as to the Tesla soaking up the vast majority of those EV rebates at the last minute. So that's an important thing because we want to make sure there's a level playing field out there, and want to make sure that the EV rebates are continuing themselves.
Okay. So how about the purchase of medium and heavy duty trucks? I mean,
yeah, the same thing.
We make trucks in Canada as well.
Absolutely, and we those incentives would continue and would also apply to those trucks. We would look in the future to supporting that. Also, when we look at some of the research and development tax credits and other things of that nature to move innovation, that's where we could get into the industrial manufacturing side, and where we've also looked at calling for a victory bonds to look at innovation, because we know some of those vehicles are actually just emerging more strongly on the market now than ever before. And it's an opportunity for us to catch into that market stream, especially in North America. I think we're ahead of the United States with that in regards to capacity. And so we'd want to keep that. So there needs to be some research investment for that. So the victory bonds are a way of Canadians contributing to innovation that they believe in, and also greening what they believe in. And so that would be one of the things we do. So keep the rebates that would continue for those things, make sure that they go. And I think the key thing here too is that if the rebates work and it's actually doing well, then we need to continue them, not just say that we're going to get rid of them at the last moment and cause distortions in the market. That tells you when you have a government program that's working, that you should continue that. And that's, again, another thing that what we want to stress as New Democrats, and what we believe it is, instead of giving the corporations a tax cut or a tax break or whatever it might be, why doesn't the consumer, you being the citizen and the family that you have, get the break? So if your money is going to go somewhere, it's guaranteed to going to go for you and your family versus that of going somewhere else. And often those tax cuts in the corporations, say, for example, the oil and gas industry, U.S. taxes on worldwide profits. So your own tax money goes to actually reducing your capacity as a Canadian to have fiscal responsibility. So we would once again reinforce that these are measures that go to you and your family. And larger vehicles are emerging, and we need to get on that right away because that market in North America could be strong for Canada.
You mentioned procurement. So our question is about electric transit buses or school bus procurement. Is there something in there that NDP has a position on?
Yeah, absolutely. That's again where there could be the procurement strategy, and we want by 20 to 30 is to have electric vehicles, buses in the system for municipalities in particular. There are some other fleet procurements that you can do to encourage in the private sector too as well, because you have to remember that there's buses that are used for seniors' homes and other types of businesses and operations. So when we think about it, it's not just the transit for municipalities. That's critical because that's the number one thing that we always think about. But when we're looking at EV buses, they're also in part of how we move about ourselves through entertainment, recreation, sometimes even healthcare services and so forth. So we would still have that Build Canada, Buy Canada, and have money available for that. And then again, those victory bonds, as we talked about, is that's where you can invest and get some of your money back. We're talking about a 3.5% rate return. So it's a modest return, but it's a guaranteed return. It's a better return that's happening right now in the Wall Street and the markets. That's for sure. But you also get a chance to do that. I remember as a kid, my dad, and I still have some of them to this day, buying me Canada savings bonds. And it was a way of me getting, a point of pride, feeling I was doing something and guaranteeing I'm going to get a return for it, and my money was safe. So that's how we believe that we could do some of that. But I would say that, you know, electrifying our municipal and provincial and federal fleets is crucial, and it's actually where we can actually lower the costs overall in the future for those fleets, and subsequently with, you know, building in Canada as well too. Once we get the public sector work orders in there, the private sector workers can come in as well too. So we just don't want to forget that there's more than just municipal fleets. There's others, as I mentioned, for those social reasons.
Yep. How about public charging infrastructure deployment for light duty vehicles and for commercial fleets? So where does the NDP stand on this issue?
Yeah, so there's a couple of key things there. Is first of all, we need a full audit of our current programs that we have and money that's unused with EV charging stations. I forget what it's at now, but there's a significant amount. I was meeting with a number of different stakeholders just before Ottawa completed, and there's a whole bunch of money that hasn't been used yet. It's been dismal in terms of the rollout. So what I've been calling for is a good example is like Canada Post. Why don't we have charging facilities at every single Canada Post and properties that we have? Other properties that we have as federal areas should be having EV charging, and we need to continue to partner the rollout there. One thing I do want to address that I don't think other parties have looked at and don't seem to actually even have appreciation for, and I will be tabling private members legislation when I get back right away. And the party supports the look at the criminal code with regards to the destruction of EV charging stations. So right now there is almost no consequence for harvesting them of the copper, the wires, and all the different things that take place. And similar to what we did with bus drivers and advocating for them as public servants that shouldn't be assaulted, and it's a serious crime because their actions and those EV charging stations, we need to make sure that you know that you and your family are going to places where you know the charging station is going to be, you know it's going to be in good operation. The companies have a responsibility to keep it up, and that's where subsequently the vandalism of those is very serious, because if it's inclement weather, if it's dark and nighttime, these are family issues that are really important in terms of making sure that the seriousness of those actions on the EV stations are more than just the physical damage. There's also a public safety issue there for all those that are relying upon those stations to be charged. We wouldn't tolerate it at gas stations. If people were going around and attacking gas stations, there certainly would be a massive response with the petroleum interests in this country. And I can tell you there'd be a crackdown in Ottawa that they've never seen before. And we should be treating the same thing with EV charging stations with seriousness. Right now, we just kind of see as a bystander, oh, we'll just go and fix it. Well, no, that's not good enough. There needs to be public service. There needs to be better security for them. There needs to be a more accountability. We would work with all the players to build in the best laws necessary to protect those areas. Because again, I'll finish with this. If there's people out there that were making it unsafe to fill up your car or gasoline in your car, and you didn't know if you could actually go there, people would act on it. The governments would act on it. The Liberals and Conservatives would act on it. But if it's EV stations right now, it's just seen as passive-aggressive behavior, which is totally unacceptable, because it's stressful enough to actually travel and understand your range with the weather and other things like that. The best thing we can do is make sure it's safe, secure, and reliable. And this way we'll have more integration.
That's a good point. Actually, it's the first. Sorry.
Okay, all
It's the
good.
first time I hear.
I'll grab some water for you.
Thanks. Okay, so let's move on to talking still about charging. So what is the NDP's position on multi-unit residential building and residential charger deployment as well?
Yeah, so we've been using some of the infrastructure funds that we have in our regular availability to include those. And we should be looking potentially at the building codes for those as well too. That's one of the things. We would want to work with the provinces with that, because each province is going to have different jurisdictional elements related to municipalities and so forth. And I'm a former city councillor, but there needs to be more support for that. And so that's where there's going to be some more consultation. And there also needs to be more support for incentives. We've had in the past incentives, and we look at that model as well too, because the apartment buildings are critical, especially if we get into smaller EVs, where we get into parking garages that can accommodate them more than some of the larger vehicles and so forth. It depends on the market. So you have like some urban areas, but we also see some of those EVs now getting out to other areas. And as we do our building program across and housing across Canada, that would be part of that, would be the EV infrastructure. So we're talking about building Canada homes and all those different things. We need to integrate those homes with the best practices with regards to sustainability. We'll have more to say that as the election kind of goes about. But as we talk about building homes across Canada, we want to make sure that they're going to be homes that are energy efficient. They're going to be modern in terms of their dependency with or their independency with regards to generation and so forth. So those would be some of the things that we'd be looking at, including EV infrastructure as part of that. If we don't, then we're going to miss opportunities. It's always more difficult to go back and try to shoehorn them in. So for new builds, that would be a priority for us.
And by the way, before I forget, one thing that I've been mentioning for a while now is the fact that when we're building new power plants, whether it's renewable, whether it's hydro or it's wind or solar or anything else, these are plants, these are projects that cannot be relocated to the US. Whatever happens with Donald Trump,
Yeah.
those jobs are created across Canada in every region, in every province, and the same goes for infrastructure.
Yeah.
So we're talking about creating jobs across Canada that will never be able to be relocated. So I think that this is a great opportunity if we're looking at ways to adjust to this new reality with the US. Infrastructure deployment certainly should be on the agenda.
Yeah. And if I could just real briefly, want to point to a previous program that we had, and we still don't know, like all parties right now, we're still exploring further options that could be used for building Canada and projects that are important that we've done through to like during the economic collapse. We had a program for your homes for renovations and so forth, and there was a missed opportunity where. I believe, there was a 10,000 incentive where people were putting on decks and they were, using from basketball courts and stuff like that. There's where I would have actually seen a better program to actually have a higher percentage of the write-off, even maybe for a little bit lower amount or whatever, do it up to 30% for doors, windows, but also EV charging components.
Yep.
Other things that relate to lowering your bill. So what I would focus on and what I would work as a member of parliament to do and would push the party towards, and we still, these are some of the things that we'll have to look at in a new parliament, is making sure that when we spend taxpayers' monies on those things, we do it in a way for home improvements in ways that you can do tax deductibility that makes it more available to people. So you could actually, make sure that the income is not a restriction, but you do it on things that would reduce bills for people and costs for the future.
Yeah.
So putting up a fence or a deck, those are nice things. But if we made sure that, say, for example, if you wanted to eventually move into an EV, then that's would be an EV charging station would be perfect. And that would also be, compliant with other things that we're now seeing, like the EV, again, as I mentioned in my opening, we're seeing electrical devices and equipment being more modernized into your home than ever before. And so there needs to be also some work done to actually the integration of all those things, solar panels, all that stuff is all things that can actually reduce the cost for you and your family in the long run. That's what we need to do different than last time. When we do these stimulus projects that come up, make sure they reduce bills for Canadians for the long run and they reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So let's talk about light duty zero emission vehicle sales targets and regulations. So where do you stand on it?
Well, we want to continue the regulations that are in place right now. And with regards to light duty, keep the incentives that are there as well as I've mentioned. Those are things that we don't want to deviate from. We want the targets to stay the same, and we don't want to change. We've seen the U.S. is altering their targets, and some states will buck that trend. There's no doubt. Some won't. I suspect. I just came back from the Detroit Auto Show. And at the Detroit Auto Show, they actually you could test light duty EVs and also cars. You got a chance to ride in them and be in them. There are several. And so the innovation is there. And so I think that there's more work to be done on this. The emergence is significant. I look at the F-150 in terms of light duty, and that there's another particular one where municipalities and their fleets provisions and so forth like that for incentives for purchasing and rolling over those things would be direct assets that the federal government can help support. As I talked about, Build Canada, Buy Canada. Those are types of things that we need to get into the system. So yeah, for myself, I just continue to be consistent with those matters, and we'll have more to say on that as well too. But in particular, don't have the targets move as a shifting element, because we don't want the companies to backtrack. And we also know from what I see, I said when I was in Detroit and in testing these vehicles, there's been good breakthroughs, and we have an opportunity to continue that trend. So deviating from it right now would be a mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. So we still don't have regulation when it comes to medium and heavy duty vehicles. So is that something that you're looking at? Because we are having discussion with the federal government right now. We've had discussion with them for months, if not years,
Yeah.
talking medium and heavy duty vehicles. So it's not been adopted yet. There's discussions, but we don't know where it's going. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, we're the same. We need to advance those. And I think there's an opportunity for us actually to be, again, a participant in building those vehicles in the market if we move on them quicker than later. So there's an opportunity there, but we need to set those regulations. Look, I mean, I'll be quite frank with you, is that, we've seen a lot of different things out there that are changing the industry, and there's concerns about not having regulations. I mean, you look at Elon Musk's the Cybertruck. Some countries have banned it because they basically described it as a missile, because of the way it's built, the way that the frame is, and so forth. And so there needs to be some regulations and an element so that there's predictability about entering those vehicles into the market and making sure that we don't run into those situations. So I know that the UK, Australia, a whole series of them. This is before the old thing with Elon Musk. It started with, his stuff with Donald Trump and Doge and all that, is that the Cybertruck, because of its the way it was built, it has high impact effect on other vehicles. It takes up a lot of space and so forth. So let's avoid problems where we have some types of innovation that doesn't come in and is part of the market. We've also seen that on the smaller side of some electrical vehicle products that have been there, where they've had a hard time through Transport Canada getting through that. So we need to get to the front of that, because there needs to be predictability for the builders in that. So I couldn't agree more. I don't know why it's taken this long.
So basically what you're saying is that you think that we need regulation, otherwise we won't reach our sales targets.
Yeah, I think that absolutely, and I think that, well, again, what we're seeing over the United States is the destabilization and chaos, which is causing problems. We don't want to have that over here. So
No.
if we are going to, and if there is a disagreement on some regulations and so forth that are coming forward, then we need to have that out in that discussion right away. The sooner that we do these things, the better, because then there's predictability about who wants to invest here. If you're going to purchase a vehicle, that there won't be a problem with it. And that's why I brought up the Cybertruck, is because, purchasers of that now have different, consequences because of what's taken place with different countries across the world and how they've perceived the vehicle's safety record on the road. And so I'd like to avoid those things, because every dollar is precious. And if you're looking for innovation, especially with EVs, we don't want to have problems. And I said, in the past, we've had that on the smaller scale, where there's been even some small Canadian companies building EVs that then later on they found out couldn't be on the Canadian roads because the regulations didn't accommodate the specifics of the vehicle in terms of the decisions by Transport Canada. So let's get all that cleared up so that there's predictability in the system. And I think there's an opportunity for us to be the forefront for production of these vehicles if we actually have that predictability.
Yep. So let's talk about the supply chain. So from critical minerals to assembly to recycling to R&D. So I'd like to hear NDP's vision of the supply chain, because this is a very important issue, especially nowadays.
Yeah, so thank you for that. That's why we've called for it since I've been here, is actually a national auto policy, because it needs to be basically from production to your driveway, having a full evolved policy that does more than just rescue opportunities that like we have some good investments with the EV battery plants, and I do give the government some credit here in terms of finally going to, most of the incentives are related if you produce the batteries. If you don't, then you're not going to get the incentive. So I've advocated for that for many years, is making sure that we just don't hand over 2 billion, 3 billion, and have no I guess accountability of how it's spent. But what I have said though is that we need something that measures everything from the production manufacturing, distribution, sales, and servicing. And the EV charging station is another good reason why we need a national auto policy, is because there's been no measurement of the vehicles getting into the Canadian market, and really strategically with making sure the stations were there. I would have loved to seen the stations actually be way more robust. Like, we're having to backfill in stations. What we should have been doing is building the stations in front of the EV production and assimilation. So it became less of a barrier for people to choose, because we know range is going to increase, but also range might change as well too. Like for drivers, many of them, and this is where I'm critical of the industry a little bit, is obsessed with range, whereas like most Canadians, per week will, drive around their neighborhood and their community and so forth, 100, 200 kilometers max.
Oh,
They
the
don't need.
average Canadian drives 15 to 16,000 kilometers a year. That's it.
Yeah. So there, the obsession over that, and I get it. Like, so there needs to be like a balance in both of this, I guess is what I'm getting at. It's the same thing too, as we've been critical in the past when, car companies, and I've talked to the car companies that, you go buy your Jeep Wrangler and then you're driving up a mountain, and meanwhile you live in a place like Windsor, Essex County, which is flat as a pancake. It's outrageous marketing. So we need to do better about the marketing of this too, and that's why I think the used EVs are actually critical too. Is I don't want to lose all of our used EVs to the United States. One of the things that people forget about is that there's a lot of auto traded back between the United States, used, and Canada.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to lose all of our used EVs to the United States, and that's why we need incentives for that market. I think I'm a little bit back to the auto policy here. But it's been called for by CEW, now it's Unifor, in terms of a national auto policy where it measures and has incentives that bring back results. It's research development. It's all those things to bring around targets. It's similar to our auto pact, which now people are talking about coming back.
60
Um,
years later.
yeah, exactly. Which we fought to stop from losing, at any rate. And lastly, I just want to mention the critical minerals again. There needs to be full consultation with Indigenous communities to do the development of the Ring of Fire, for example. If we try to force something, all we're going to have is social conflict, and we're going to have lawsuits, and we're going to have a longer time. I know some people can feel that, well, it's going to take some more time, this and that, but it will take even more time if we don't do this right. So it's important that we get into there. And I think the big lesson to be learned is from the oil patch is that we don't do almost any of our refining now. We send our refining, instead of our country actually having some of the most, I guess, environmentally improved refining capacity, we just ship it away. We rip and ship. And I don't want to do the same thing with critical minerals. That's where our victory bonds and other things can go into investment. Is I want to actually develop and do manufacturing and development of our own critical minerals. We have an opportunity to that, and we have all these lessons, whether it's the oil and gas sector, whether it's even the lumber sector, where we rip and ship and we don't do value added. So we have to learn that lesson, and I'm
Will we?
hoping that that's what we do.
Will we? Because I've been talking about this. I'm sure you have as well for decades.
Yeah, well, this is the difference,
Exactly.
right? I mean, so that's why as New Democrats, it's important that we get back there. And if we become, basically a red-blue state like the U.S., then you won't have pushing for these innovations like we push for the pharmacare, for the dental care, all those things, the wedges things. And I've been the wedge at industry committee, even getting witnesses for electric vehicles and other innovation where people aren't even consulted if they don't get on the list to be heard. And so we need to reposition ourselves strongly on these matters. So when opportunity arises, you get them in there. And critical minerals, again, if we're gonna try to use bully tactics to develop our critical minerals on the partners that we need to work with, it's just going to backfire. So we need to make sure that they also have a vested interest. And just look at, say, for example, the Congo, and you look at what the world has done to the Congo. That's enough there to say, why don't we become the role model to make sure that our communities that have these resources in them and they're supporting communities around them are going to benefit in the wealth that's generated, and their lives are going to get better, and they're done as a true partner. That is what if we can learn one lesson is that we don't want to have something that's taking place in the Congo, where you have literally the poorest of the poor versus the wealthiest of the wealthiest. And if you're one of the 1%, that's great for you, but everybody else is just left behind. It's unacceptable. We could actually do a model here in Canada with critical resources that would be significant for the world.
Okay. So how about EV awareness and training? So there's the side where consumers need to be aware of the EVs and how they work and all that. There's the training side for workers and future workers. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, this is one of the challenges, and I brought forth the bill for right to repair, so you can actually repair your automotive, get the skills, equipments, and the things that are necessary to fix your vehicle. And that was done as an environmental reason. It was also done as a public safety reason, and so forth. So I believe that also has to be updated. Right now it's just a voluntary agreement. It has its ups and downs, but we need to make sure that the EV component is part of it. And so I'd like to make sure that there is actually going to be further training supplies, supports, all those different elements that are necessary. It's funny because when my friend went and bought his electric vehicle from Ford, they kept on insisting to purchase an oil changing package. So yeah, true
I've had
story.
that,
He
I've
bought
had that as well.
yeah. So there's lots of there's lots of awareness that needs to take place. And again, some of this should be done through marketing as well too. Like we don't need we need some of the companies to come forth with some better honest marketing, and that's where I think the Competition Bureau needs to be at least looking at some of these things as well for the future. Again, I always think about that you buy that sports utility vehicle and you're headed out on the weekend and all of a sudden you got a bunch of camping gear and then you're driving all over the place going there. Well, no, what we should be showing is how easy and successful it is to actually charge your vehicle and so forth. And I still think that as I mentioned earlier about the charging stations is part of that, is because there also public education there that needs to be better. I think the companies have to do a better job of making sure that the charging stations and then also the universality of them is brought forth, because these are things that are important for consumers, public safety, and so forth. And I just see that as, to me, that's one of the top things right now, is to make sure, because we don't have enough EV charging stations as it is. The ones that we have are under threats. I mean, there's enough there that vandalize, and there's enough there that also aren't working. We privatize Measurement Canada, and I'd rather see us actually deprivatize that and that element of inspection, because our pumps are inspected as well too. So those EV charging stations need to be inspected regularly as well too, to make sure that they're maintained.
Okay. Last but not least question. In light of tariffs, do you have any proposals to support Canada's EV industry and its workers?
Yeah, right away, that's an easy one. And we've already called for this, is to reinstate the EV incentive to $10,000 from the $5,000. So right now, the Liberals have actually canceled that. The Conservatives have no interest in it, and it's abysmal. When you think about this, prior to even Trump getting in, you could get a $7,500 tax credit from a Canadian-built EV in the United States, and meanwhile, we're not even supporting it over here. That's $7,500 US, which is what, $30,000 Canadian? No, I'm just joking. But the reality is here,
10,000.
Bumbar's up to 10,000, right away. Waive the GST off of domestically produced automobiles, especially we have the EVs in Windsor here as an example. Do procurement strategies to keep the lines running. And that incentive is the very least we could do. We now have the subsequent problem is that some provinces are dropping off the EV incentive because the federal government did. I've also called for the audit of the system to make sure that it's done fairly, so that those that are in the workforce that are trying to promote EVs and sell EVs are going to be protected as well too. Because you see what's happening is that sales of people of different car companies, if they don't have that incentive, they're going to try to push other vehicles versus electrical vehicles, because there'll be less incentives to do so, and so the consumer price point goes up. So we need to get that back immediately. Build Canada, buy Canada, of course. Like I say, I've said it, many, many times about domestic procurement and so forth to be used at that. I think those are the things to start, and really, ask the provinces to step up on this.
Yeah.
Some have. Some have, and to be quite frank, some have done, if not more, but also very quite close to what the federal government did in the past. Some have been in those realms, and Quebec actually did even better. So, these are things that we need to do and have incentives to bring them along. And lastly, I'll just say this: it's just an embarrassment to me that you can get an EV incentive for the Windsor-built minivan in the United States and several states, and you still can't get that from our own country where they're building. The workers are actually at home today. I'm totally embarrassed for and I've asked Prime Minister Mark Carney to deal with this. I'm disappointed. They talk about money that goes out. We're going to have this billion, that billion. But here's a simple thing we can do right now. Put in the EV incentive. All you need to do is refund it. It doesn't even take Parliament to do that. Waive the GST. Let's get going.
Any last thoughts before we finish this conversation?
Yeah, I just appreciate it. I know that there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety with the US out there right now, but that's opportunity. That's opportunity for us to step forward. And that's where we can, go our different way in many respects, but still have success with our relationship. And I'm working on it every day. I'm actually vice chair of the Canada-US Interparliamentary Association. So I went and spoke at the Congressional Breakfast for the Great Lakes. And I can tell you, we have allies out there. And so we need to keep doing that work, but use this as an opportunity. And electric vehicles, and I would say that more than just electric vehicles, but also, like I said, I've mentioned many times, other products that are out there. We have other mobility devices that we've been focusing on vehicles and a lot here right now, but there's other mobile devices that, scooters and bikes and a whole series of different transportation devices that we should be looking at for further incentives, waiving GST, public policy that right now, when you're building in Canada, and there's some great innovators that we have in those sectors, need some support. And if we're going to address climate change and we're going to address other types of issues, these are where I think public funds should go and where public funds should be supporting them. So there's more to be done. The election won't solve all those different issues, but in Parliament, we need champions that want to do that. And I'll conclude with this, is that again, if we're going to do programs to deal with the downturn here that are going to be incentives to help you and your family at home, let's do ones that are going to actually save you money in the long run. Solar, wind, other electrical components and devices that, for charging and whatnot, that can make you and your family less dependent upon energy consumption that is, basically destroying the planet, but also too, is going to make more capabilities of your family to be successful and money back in your pockets.
Well, Mr. Masse, thank you very much for participating in this conversation, and we wish you the best. If you could stay for a second after we stop recording. Are there any questions? I can't see them, so I don't know.
I don't see any questions in the.
No? Okay, perfect. So we'll finish the recording right now.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. That was, I always appreciate